This is my final part of drawing a rose in pastel. So I've left it overnight and had a wee look at it and decided there's a few finishing touches I need to do, particularly in the outside petals I feel, and there's lots of little bits of refining that I'll do with the coloured pencils. So the best thing to do is to start with an area that stands out to you, that you notice straight away that's not right. Usually at the beginning of a day you'll spot that quite easily. So I'm up here, I'm just changing the slight shape of this petal because it's not as leaf shaped as it looked, it's a wee bit obvious. So I'm just cutting in there and making it, readdressing that area. So when I do that, what I need to do is get the background as well. So what's behind the petal has to chop it in two. It's called biting in. And that will also alter the shape. Make sure it does go right in where I see it at this stage. I see it going in more like that shape, and also that's quite a blue highlight rather than a yellow, so I'm just going to find a light blue to put on it. So remember, you can still mix pastels at this stage if you're using good pastels and good paper. Watercolour paper is excellent for pastels, so I would recommend using a not pressed paper, which has got a grain but it's not too rough. The rougher papers can be a wee bit hard for the pastel, and you need to use an awful lot of pastel. Obviously you can use pastel papers, but I tend to prefer watercolour paper. And I'm really fond of this paper that I'm using, which is a Fabriano paper that is no longer made, sadly. But it's got a lovely tooth to it, but it's also a beautiful grey colour, which is very appealing. Just going through the whole portrait right now with this light bluey grey colour. It is a white rose, so I've started with it almost looking like a grey rose, and as time's gone on I've pulled the light out of the grey, and that way you get more exact tones. So you just do all the rough work, and then you can blend it all the same as the other videos prior to this one. I just look around and I find the little bits that need this colour and do them all at once. It's best to work through a portrait or like this obviously isn't a portrait of a person, but it is a portrait of a flower. So whatever your subject, it's best to work your way through, all the time working through, and then focus on a little bit at a time and then go back and work through it again. You'll get far more coherence if you do that. I'm just going to find a slightly different colour, which is a slight purpley colour to it, the grey. So once you've done that, you can get your blending stick out again. What you can also do is to stop too much of it coming off, you just push it in the page with your finger. Make sure your finger's not too dirty. It just embeds it in. Now I'm using the point of the blending stick and I'm not being that rough. Sometimes at the beginning I will almost scrub it on and scrub it around, but when it's at this stage I'm far more careful in my handling of the tools I'm using. It's quite hard to see what you're doing because of all the dust, so make sure you blow it away. If you're worried about the dust, you can wear a mask. I've never worn a mask, but I know some people struggle with asthma. You do get a certain amount of dust that comes out, but I've never really been aware of it being a problem with anyone I've worked with. Just going to soften that edge. And that's all that pastel I put on earlier. Use the point of the blending sticks 90% of the time. If you're doing a broad area, you can use the side of it there, and it's a good way to rub large areas, but generally speaking, I would use the point. So make sure you get a good quality blending stick, because some are really soft and they don't do this as effectively. Going through the whole portrait where I've put all the pastel a minute ago. I'm looking at my reference constantly. Right, I'm going to have a look at these ones here. I think it's just a wee bit lost here at the bottom. So I'm going to look at there's almost like a little reflected highlight here at the bottom side of the leaf, the petal, sorry. So I'm trying to find something that's going to do that, that's not going to be too light. So I'll go into my grey set and find something that's in between almost. I think this is actually a colour that's also in my own set, the Denise Findlay Set, and it's quite a good in-between grey, that's why I picked it. Now, I have my own pastel set that's been given to me by Unison Colours, as I'm an associate artist of theirs. So it's a wonderful privilege to have my own set, and I'm delighted to have one because so many people have asked me what's a good set to get for portraiture, or, you know, in general, what are good colours to buy, because they have such a huge range. And now I have found that set, I've tried to test it an awful lot. I've used it for demos an awful lot, and many people have bought it and absolutely love the set. So I had to pick my 18 favourite colours to produce it. Just a bit more of that there. Have a look at the shape on this side. Now I'm just going to, I quite like it to be quite soft, the edge. I don't want it to be the focal point. It's almost, bits of it need to be tight and the rest a little bit more vague, I feel. I'm not quite sure how it will work, but I'll follow my instincts and just soften it, and then I'll sharpen some bits as well. So if I go back to my charcoal, where is it here? So this is just the charcoal, or you could use the dark grey, which is almost a black, or the carbon, or any compressed charcoal. Just go back up and sharpen some of it without putting a line around the whole thing. It's too obvious to do that, it has far less impact. If you look at nature, there's no hard lines around anything. So you need to be clever with where you put line. and it's very effective when you are selective with it as well. Be thoughtful and mindful of everything that you put on your page. Don't just put things for the sake of it. Don't just draw without considering what you're drawing. Blend that through. Use my stick to push the charcoal into that corner. It's almost like I'm sculpting the pastel with my blending stick. I might be better using the bigger stick for this. Quite like keeping what's going on about it quite loose to contrast with the detail. It's not a photograph, I don't want it to look photographic. And I also don't want it to be perfectly smooth. Texture is important to me. And also using your medium, whatever your choice of medium is, to its full advantage. I work in many different mediums. I work in watercolour, oils, pastels, pencil, scraper board. Now in the image I've been working from, there are actually leaves here. But for the sake of just showing you how to do the rose, I'm just going to leave it at, I'm focusing on the petals of the rose. That's for another day, the leaf. Right, so I'm just going to take a wee stand back and look at it. I think my camera's slightly gone squinty, so I'm just going to move that back round. I think when I kicked it, it knocked it out. This is the first YouTube set of videos I've made, so bear with me. And I'm currently using my phone, which isn't ideal. I will be using a camera shortly and doing some more professional ones. With the recent corona crisis, it's pushed me into finally getting around to doing this so that people can see what I'm up to, something I've been wanting to do for a wee while. So it's a bit of a learning curve at the moment. Right, so this is just a coloured pencil. It's a Faber-Castell sepia colour, which is lovely for just toning down wee bits within the shadows that are a tiny bit light, like this reflected highlight. So the great thing with coloured pencils, as I mentioned before, is they're just really fine. This is actually a very nice pencil. I only have this colour in it though. But as I said yesterday, you can use any coloured pencils. It does not have to be even an artist pencil. It's a wee bit unconventional for pastel to use coloured pencils, but it's something that I discovered really works in just fine-tuning more than anything else. Because I think pastel pencils are great, but they're a wee bit more clumsy. You can be quite delicate with these. I think using neutral tones like browns and greys always work with the coloured pencils, so I would recommend those sorts of colours. White can also be useful just to blend. It's a finer way of blending to the stick, so Just going around the whole portrait and looking for these fine shadows. I don't think it's appropriate to call it a portrait, but it is actually a still life. But to me, I suppose flowers are living forms like people and animals, so that's what keeps coming out my mouth. I'm relatively new to drawing and painting roses and flowers. It came about through a portrait commission I was given earlier this year, and the client was wearing like a head wrap which had lots of beautiful folds, and I always love painting folds, so it just occurred to me that roses are pretty much folds. That's what they're about, and that's what opened up that avenue to me to focus on a very different subject to what I normally paint, which is people and animals. So that you can see that this just grades the tones gently. You can even go over the white just to take it back a little bit. You don't want your whites to be too bright either, you want them to be just right. Sometimes they're not all coherently the same white. There's a lovely wee shadow here where that petal touches this one. As you can see, it's a wee bit grainy. I don't know if the camera will pick that up, but if it gets grainy, you can always put another colour over it, like a white or a light grey, which I can show you. So this is a light grey colour soft pencil. So if I put that on top of the sepia, you can see it just almost blends it. So it's quite good to do that too. You could spend weeks fine-tuning something, a portrait especially. When it comes to demos, I have to work very fast and I'm used to doing them, so I usually have about an hour and a half to 2 hours to produce quite a large-scale pastel portrait, which isn't that long, but you do get used to working quickly, which might be slightly deceptive because when I do my own work, I spend a lot longer. Right, there's a wee shadow here as well. So we're looking at how these petals affect the ones below, which will in turn address these petals here. One thing always leads on to another thing, exactly as it would in a portrait. Just now gone up here, which may be a slight diversion to what I was doing, but I tend to go where I feel like going at that time. Something catches my eye, I just go and work on it while I see it, especially in a demonstration situation because of the time constraint. At the moment we're all in isolation due to the coronavirus, which I mentioned yesterday, which has been interesting, although as an artist I'm used to a fairly isolated lifestyle anyway, so it's not a massive change. Obviously there's other changes, but the great thing about it for people who are wanting to be creative is it's a wonderful way to take your mind off what's been going on. There's so little that's out that we can control about this. that this is something that as a creator you can control what you're creating, and it's very, very helpful, even for people who aren't artists, to just pick up a pencil or something and create something at this time. You know, you may be writing or singing, but obviously mine's visual arts. It could actually prove to be a very productive time for people who choose to do that. Back with my charcoal here. You're still able to get art supplies if you wanted to get any pastels. If you look online, you should find them. You won't be able to get my set online. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's only available through myself, but if you're interested, as soon as they're available, I can arrange that for you if you're wanting to buy a set. But I'll talk about that in another demo when I'm only using it solely. So still building up. There's a lovely shadow. It's the way that these petals affect the ones below, and I feel I just haven't quite got it yet, but what you do is you have to just keep working on it and tweaking it until you get it. And eventually you do get it. And it's like that with every medium that I use. You're not in a hurry, you don't want to rush it, there's no need to rush it. I'm in a bit more of a hurry because I'm trying to do it for demonstration, but I think sometimes it's helpful for people just to see the way that I go about it, and the fact that I don't have a plan of action as such. The fact that I don't follow the conventional rules. Very often I do my own thing a lot. So lovely shadows down here as well. Time to address them. I'm not leaning ridiculously hard, just a little bit to get what I need on. Doesn't seem to need too much pressure applied. I'll take a wee stand back again in a minute. Again, this shadows, it's just the way these shadows come in are important. Possibly need to be a wee bit bluer as well, which I can do with a blue colour pencil, which I think I've got one here from yesterday. So where you put the brown, you can also put blue, which I think just warms, it doesn't warm it up because it's blue, but it gives the brown a wee bit more life. You can see that it leaves a wee tint, hopefully, of colour. Take a wee step back in a sec. Let's go over these parts with the grey again, which you can see blends it, because you don't want it to look like you've got colour pencil on your pastel, particularly because it will look a bit grainy. Alright, just a wee bit more of that. Where did that pencil go? Still, there's a little bit here of reflected highlight. I'm trying to figure out what I'll do because it's quite yellow in here, but then there's a lovely dark as well, but I think we need it to show the form of this petal below. Just to explore. This is Conte, which is a harder pastel, which I use very occasionally to do little bits and pieces because it's almost like a pastel pencil. If I want a tiny wee bit of pigment applied, it's good for that. If you want a little tint of yellow, it's good for that too. Right, let's have a wee blend with that and then I'll look back if I can find my blending stick. Stand back, as I said I would 10 minutes ago. I feel that's looking a lot better. It's looking far more like rose petals. There's some little bits and pieces I want to do to it, which I'm just, as I'm standing looking at it, I'm making these choices. It's good to give it some thought and don't just keep drawing for the sake of it. I like the way that the shadows are coming in here and here, and it's curving them round because they're so delicate, the petals. If you don't get that sensitivity into it, it just doesn't look like rose petals. Okay, so I think I should do a wee bit more with the coloured pencil. Most of my finishing work is done with that. I've also got a pastel pencil, which is quite a good colour, which is a pale yellow, which I use a lot. So let's try that first and see. It may not go over the pastel that well. Seems not bad. Seems to be able to go on top, which is helpful. Pale yellows are great for the whites. So I think I said yesterday whites can look really chalky, and they can. So using a pale yellow or a cream, and I've got that beautiful cream that I was using earlier, it just takes the edge off the starkness of the white. I've had this pastel pencil for about 25 years. I don't use it very often, but it does come in handy for certain things, and I think this type of finishing that I'm needing to do needs this colour, so it's quite helpful at the moment. Now if I did this with a pale yellow coloured pencil, it wouldn't really apply as much pigment. That's the problem with the Pens colour pencil. You need to put the pigment on either with a pastel or with something like this, or Conte. Conte does the same as this. Some of the cheaper range pastels are good for this type of thing, but all round they're not helpful in creating such a variety of colours and tones. So even if I put that over that white, just tones it down a wee bit. But it doesn't leave as much as a pastel would, so you have to be aware. So this is the cream pastel. Light 2. This is in my set as well, and it's the step up from white. You get the white and then the light 2. Just reforming some of these wee bits. And then I'll go back with my white again on top, so I won't mix it until, I won't blend it until I've got the pigment on. I must have put white on that petal a million times. It's amazing that you can do that with these. There's key light areas that I want to shine and pop, so that's why I keep going back over them. There's actually a lovely wee bit here. And while I've done that, I'll just go back with my brown sepia, if I can find it. There it is. Just sharpen that wee bit there, which will enhance that wee highlight. As you can see, it comes forward when I do that. Before I blend, I'll just do a bit more dotting around with the pencils. Now this is the Pit Oil pastel pencil, which is pretty much a black, and I'm using this cautiously, but I would like that area to be darker, just where it meets the bottom of the rose centre. Any wee neatening up you just do now. Be very gentle around this. I don't want it to look at all black, but I do want it to be darker. It's looking good. Right, so I would quite like to use a blue. And I'm just wondering where I've got one at hand. I'll try maybe the coloured pencil first and see if it works. So some of these areas, some of the shadows are quite blue. Let's see what happens if I put some blue on top. It just livens up the grey, and it will complement these lovely salmon tones I put on yesterday, which is actually a red. That's a form of red, that colour. I think it's a red 6. But down here I feel this needs to be more blue. I'm using a kind of cornflower blue, I suppose, just to bridge the shadows into the lights and also to keep them lively. This works as a blending stick. As you can see, it's a lovely way to remove some of the pastel and blend them into the highlights. I think that I could probably go this way with it and just break it up a wee bit. And leave a wee tint of blue. Just having a wee stand back. I'm not going to do too much more to it because I feel it has reached its conclusion for what it is. And also, if you're doing this at home, I don't want to overwhelm people by giving them too much at once. The original beginnings of this started yesterday at my Zoom class, my art class. I was doing it on Zoom, and unfortunately the quality of the Zoom recording is not brilliant to show you, so you've missed the first 20 minutes if you're only watching these demos. But as I produce more videos, you'll soon understand the way that I go about beginning, and I will show you different mediums and different demos in time. But it basically involves dirtying your paper with willow charcoal, using your rubber to lift off some of the shapes, and then just building up the mid-tones and then the highlights and then looking at the darks. I know it sounds very simplified, but that's basically what I do. I do draw in as well first, but not for pastel generally. I do both. I draw in and I block in. If I teach people, I tend to teach them to block in, because once they're able to do that, they get far more of a likeness for portraiture. It's a very easy way to teach people to draw, because they have to let go of all their preconceptions. And it's the easiest way to achieve proportion. So this was the blocking in technique. There was no drawing in. And it was done, as I said, as a wee demo for my class. I think at the moment, I'm going to call it a day at that. I'll try and zoom in. I'll see if it zooms in so you can see a wee bit more detail close up. There you can see a little bit more if you look like that, and then from a distance. That's it. So I hope you've enjoyed that and that you've learnt something. See you next time.